We are going to have a discussion about the myths of redistricting that we've been hearing around the state and from legislators and others. And we want to get the record straight on all of those. So we're going to have an interactive session to share some of those myths and what we believe are the facts. And then we are going to, Cuffy Sullivan, our communications chair, is going to share with you the same briefing that we did for the media last week to share with you the very exciting information that, that we have in terms of benchmarks having been developed through our partnership with Princeton Gerrymandering Project. And then we have a very special unveiling of our interactive map with our cartographer, Sarah Hodges is going to be sharing that real time. And then, as I said, we're going to do some Q&A and wrap up with what are the things that you can do in the next 6 weeks before special session starts now on November the 3rd. We've got a lot of work to do over the coming weeks to continue to make our voices heard. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cuffy, who's going to lead us through some of this discussion on the myths and facts of redistricting.
Thank you, Janet. Let's jump right in. Myth. I've heard many elected officials say that maps drawn by the Republicans in 2011 were fairer than maps drawn by the Democrats in 2001 because they were pre-cleared by the U.S. Department of Justice under President Obama. Gerrymandered maps drawn by the Democrats were struck down by the Supreme Court in 2004, whereas the 2011 maps were never challenged in court.
So I'm going to take that one. My name is Ken Lawler. This is an interesting myth. It's a perennial greatest hit that we hear a lot from many legislators. And I'll say that it's a great example of cherry picking your facts to tell your story. Here's why I say that, right? So first of all, the maps that were drawn in 2001 by the Democrats were also pre-cleared. They don't tell you that when they make this point about, well, we got pre-clearance in 2011. The maps were pre-cleared before the 2002 election. Those maps were, as we have said many times, a very bad gerrymander on the part of the Democrats. So those maps were cleared. They then went through an election. They were challenged in court, and in fact, the U.S. Supreme Court threw out. It retained our congressional map, but they threw out our state Senate and our state House map. So they were very bad gerrymandered and thrown out, even though they were pre-cleared. So what that means is that even though you are pre-cleared, that does not guarantee that you have a fair map. That's the message there. And in fact, former U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder was quoted last week in a piece in The Atlantic saying the very same thing. So we like pre-clearance. It's a good deterrent against monkey business. We'd like to have it back. We'd like to have the John Lewis Voting Rights Act restore pre-clearance. We don't have it right now. But nonetheless, the deal is that pre-clearance isn't a guarantee. Now, you also have to understand what's been going on in the last 20 years in this space, right? In 2001, when maps were drawn, you could look at them and spot a gerrymander from a mile away because the shapes are all these weird, contrived shapes on the map. Since 2010, when modern software came into being for doing this redistricting stuff, the redistricting is a lot more surgical, and therefore the gerrymandering can be done in a very subtle way. You can't just look at a map and see that something sticks out like a sore thumb. What you really have to do is look at what happens after an election, after that map is used in an election. So again, in 2001, pre-cleared map used in an election, bad result, court threw it out. What happened in 2011? A very bad map was used in an election. The map resulted in it was a very unfair gerrymander. Our history report that we released in June or July, whenever it was, said that map resulted in a supermajority for the Republicans in the state assembly, even though the Republicans got fewer votes statewide as they did the year before, the election before. So again, we look at that map and say, no, it wasn't fair. You can claim it was fair because it got pre-clearance. Sorry, folks, it was not a fair map by any standard. It was no better than the Democratic map that was done before. Now, the last point they're making with this myth is, well, it was never challenged in court. Okay, here's the deal. Challenging a map in court is a very costly undertaking. It's a big deal. You have to decide, A, if you have the resources to do it, and B, is it strategically the right thing to do? And there are some reasons why you might not want to do that if you think the court's unfriendly. The bottom line was, they're correct that the map was not challenged in court, but that is not a stamp of approval in our view. The map was unfair. Our statistics show it was unfair. That's the end of our story on that myth.
Thank you, Ken. Senator Bill Cassert said, in 2011, Republicans were in charge of drawing maps for the first time in 100 years, and they were drawn fairly.
Well, actually, that's wrong on 2 counts. Republicans undertook an unnecessary mid-cycle redistricting in 2005 to redraw maps that had been drawn by a federal court in 2004. The 2011 redistricting was actually not the first time in 100 years. The guidelines that were used in 2011 actually removed a very important provision from the 2005 that stated, no district shall be established with the intent or effect of diluting the voting strength of members of a political party. The result was in 2012, the election yielding a Republican supermajority in the General Assembly, despite Republicans getting a declining share of the statewide vote. Now, Republicans have openly admitted that they were gerrymandering, according to Don Baylor, another former state senator who served on previous redistricting committees. He said during the 2011 cycle that Republicans and Democrats, or every single legislator, Republican or Democrat, doesn't want their district to become a swing district. Everybody knows how they like their lines to be drawn. So it's important for us to remember that this myth is not the truth.
When we text folks, when they put the door hangers, when they get, when they have the yard signs, when they have people, knocking on.
I'm so sorry, I couldn't find my thing, my screen. Representatives Lynn Smith and Darlene Taylor have commented that fairness is just an adjective for whatever a person's position is. Fairness, like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder.
And Cuffy, I'm going to take that one and respond exactly as I did when I testified before the joint redistricting committees on August the 30th. And this comment was made several times to me. And the way that I responded is that what is really exciting about what we're doing with our work with Princeton is that we are developing independent benchmarks that will provide an objective way, not a subjective way. So it's not like beauty in the eyes of the beholder. It is an objective measurement. And later on this evening, you're going to see what those objective measurements are. And those are going to be something that we can all use to be able to objectively evaluate these maps as they are released. So, so stay tuned for the word on the benchmarks in a few minutes.
Thank you, Janet. Representative Ed Seltzer has said that computer algorithms cannot be trusted to judge maps because they have a built-in bias, such as achieving some political outcome.
I should answer that one because he actually addressed it to me. Karen McCowan, I was testifying with Janet Grant at the Joint Redistricting Committee hearing on August the 30th. And Representative Setzler spoke up and he waved his phone around and said, oh, you know, you're always trying to wave science at us, you know, about saying that just because something is on a computer means it's objective. And of course, there is a grain of truth there. However, the Princeton Maps collection called an ensemble is drawn without political intent. The criteria used to select the 1 million maps that end up in the collection comply with the traditional redistricting criteria of contiguity, compactness, and compliance with the Voting Rights Act that is built into not only federal law, but the redistricting guidelines that the LCRO, the Legislative Office of Reapportionment, Congressional and Legislative Reapportionment, is obliged to follow. They also are obliged to, use state constitutional law for instance, contiguous districts. Representative Setzler was trying to make the point that that Princeton had probably weighted these criteria so that the resulting map collection would yield the result that we were looking for, and that is not true. The maps, all of the criteria used to select the maps for the what's called the map ensemble or the map collection are weighted equally. So again, the whole idea of creating this collection of maps in which to derive benchmarks that can be used to compare an enacted map against or a proposed map against is to establish tests for fairness that can be used for comparison.
Thank you, Karen. Senator Kennedy, chair of the Senate Redistricting Committee, has indicated that the committees are committed to an open, fair redistricting process. They want to take advantage of all available data.
Well, Coffee, that's what they've said. The committee chairs have announced their commitment to an open, fair redistricting process again and again in public hearings. But actions speak louder than words. Over and over in the public hearings, we heard citizens ask the committees to allow public comments on proposed maps, to consider independent benchmarks in evaluating whether the maps were fair, and to allow citizens who want to submit written testimony to also submit maps, charts, and data in addition to plain text testimony. So far, we haven't heard of any plans to take public comment or to consider independent benchmarks. And instead of adding the capability of submitting maps and charts to public written testimony, the committees have actually imposed 1,000-character limit on plain text testimony, not 1,000 words, 1,000 characters. So in response to the request to allow people to submit broader public testimony, we actually got a restriction. But as the special session gets closer and closer, we will have an opportunity to see the actions of the committees and to judge whether they are truly committed to a fair, open process.
Thank you, Barbara. Representative Bonnie Rich, chairman of the House Redistricting Committee, has said that the guidelines adopted for 2021 are based on what the committees heard in the public hearings.
My name is Margaret Blackman, and I was in several public hearings, including testifying in Columbus, and then also on August 30th when the two committees met. And frankly, I was appalled when this statement came out shortly after that, because it is if they did not make really pay any real attention to what hundreds of us had said at those public hearings that were held in various locations all around the state. They contain no improvements for additional transparency, and they also ignored the 15 specific guidelines for improving that 20 organizations, including Fair Districts Georgia, had presented to them in a letter way back on April the 19th. So as far as I'm concerned, they have listened and they have said they would pay attention, but they have just adopted exactly. And in fact, the AJC picked up the very next day saying that they have approved the redistricting guidelines that were identical to those despite calls from the public for greater transparency.
Thank you, Margaret. There, according to Representative Richard Smith, there may not be time to allow public comment on the proposed maps.
This is Hildegard Gray Cuffey. I think that's kind of humorous, actually. And it's interesting that Representative Richard Smith said that because he's a member of the redistricting committee for the House. And they're the ones that create the timeline for this whole process. These maps will govern our elections for 10 years, for the next decade. So allowing a 2-week public comment period, which was, by the way, requested by 20 different organizations during the committee-sponsored town halls, seems to me would be a really worthwhile investment in fair maps. I can't think of any reason that public comments can't be taken.
Thank you, Hildegard. Representative Bonnie Rich, again, the chairman of the House Redistricting Committee, has implied that keeping counties and precincts whole should override other considerations, such as maximizing competitive districts and keeping cities whole.
Hi, I'm Sarah Hodges. As the resident cartographer, I think I should take that one. So yes, it is true that counties and precincts are important units of election administration. So minimizing disruption to them is important, but that is definitely not more important than achieving fair and competitive maps. Maps that represent actual communities of interest, like university communities, communities centered on ethnic or racial populations, or like cities. In particular, cities are often fully contained in a county. So maintaining counties and precincts certainly cannot explain the 44% increase in split cities in the last redistricting session in 2011. We don't want to see that again.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, we are now going to present to you the presentation that we gave to the media. And I'm going to share my screen with you right now. All right. Can everyone see that? Somebody nod. Thank you. Okay. Somebody nod. All right. Today, I'm really excited to present a summary of our phase 2 findings of our innovative partnership between Fair Districts Georgia and the Princeton Gerrymandering Project. You know, before I do that, because I recognize that I'm being recorded here, I should probably, well, I guess I can't really change my background there. I don't want to have myth behind my head when I'm talking about this, because this part's actually fact. We've joined together to provide an independent, nonpartisan analysis of Georgia's political landscape for the state legislature and the public in support of the 2021 redistricting cycle. And today we're going to present to you what we've learned, what we know, and what we should expect. The 2020 census tells us that Georgia is larger. We've grown from 9.7 to 10.7 million citizens. It's urban. Much of the growth is, of course, in the metro Atlanta area and growing in new places such as Forsyth and Bryan County here on the coast. Also, that the rural areas are shrinking or stagnating. It also tells us that Georgia is increasingly diverse. We know that Georgia is polarized with a divide between the rural, typically more GOP areas, while the urban areas are increasingly blue and diverse. However, we are now a swing state. And as we look at the change in the presidential elections over the past decade, we can see that illustrated. Let's start by going back to Fair District's thesis question. Can fair maps be drawn in Georgia? What do we mean by that? Working with the Princeton Gerrymandering Project, we wanted to discover the natural political landscape or preference across Georgia. We also wanted to look at why Georgia's maps weren't competitive and understand if that was a reflection of political preference or unresponsive mapping. It's worth noting that Georgia is a very non-competitive state with just a little over 50% unopposed races, while the national average is around 35%. This is not just a problem for voters, but for politicians as well. Lack of competition impacts voter turnout. Turnout for the presidential election, for example, is 16% lower in state house districts with uncontested elections. Fair maps should reflect our state's increasing diversity and honor communities of interest, something talked about again and again in the hearings across the state. Communities are self-defined and more of an art than a science, which is why it's important for redistricting committees to listen to their citizens. In phase one, which is now complete, we took a look back, the 20-year history of redistricting in Georgia, how that redistricting has affected democracy in our state, and we performed statistical simulations to create benchmarks on what fair maps should have looked like so that we could compare them to enacted maps to see how they truly stacked up. Phase two is about using the recently released census data to create new benchmarks so that we can evaluate proposed maps once they're finally released in real time to determine if they're fair. In phase two, fair districts in the Princeton Gerrymandering Project used a computer model to draw 1 million maps per chamber, House, Senate, and Congress, that comply with redistricting laws. They're not random because they follow the guidelines, but they are non-political, for example, not taking into consideration existing incumbencies. We also use these models to look at the partisan lean of the state, see how many districts might be competitive, and what kind of minority representation we could expect. Let's look at what the data showed us. Today, we're not going to talk much about the enacted maps, as we thoroughly covered that in our 20-year history, and which you can find on our website, fairdistricts.org. Also, without going deeply into the data and methodology, know that unfairly drawn maps would potentially fall outside these expected ranges. Instead, we'll look at what our benchmark showed for 2011 and compare that to what the data shows us to expect in fairly drawn maps in 2021. Here you can see what our expected partisan distribution looks like in the state Senate. We've clearly become a swing state in the past decade with everything moving closer to the middle and about a 4 district distribution potentially. We see the same trend in the state House. We've again seen a significant move to the middle. And in Congress, our data suggests the same or slightly more Democratic districts and the same or slightly fewer Republican districts in fairly drawn maps. We also looked at what we should be expecting in competitive districts, districts where Republicans, Democrats, or other parties could compete for voters. This data, garnered from 1 million maps, shows that hundreds of thousands of maps indicate that we're looking for competitive Senate districts in these ranges. About 1 to 7 for the state Senate. In the House, another 1 million maps give us ranges of competitive districts we might expect in fairly drawn maps, probably between 9 and 22. And in Congress, we again expect to see at least 0 to 3 competitive districts based on what 98% of our 1 million maps are telling us. We also looked at Black and other minority representation. In 2011, we had 15 state Senate districts, but 0 influence district. So the letter, if not the spirit of the Voting Rights Act was followed. With increasing minority growth, we expect to see at least 16 districts or more, and at least 0 to 3 influence district, where Black voters make up 37 to 50% of that district. We may also see the opportunity for minority coalitions and potentially opportunity districts with 37 to 50% Hispanic voters. Despite the growth in Black population, there are fewer Black House majority districts in the currently enacted maps. Black voting age population has grown mostly in places that were already majority Black, leading to increased packing and overpopulated districts. While the census data and our models predict at least 48 Black majority districts in the House, this is the result of overall numeric analysis, and it does not necessarily satisfy all the criteria to be a Voting Rights Act opportunity district. We expect to see a number of new majority minority districts in the House. In addition, there's at least 1 Hispanic majority district possible in the House map. There may be more. There is a real opportunity for increased minority opportunity and influence in the state House. In Congress, we expect to see at least 4 Voting Rights Act congressional districts, which has not changed. And we again expect to see at least 0 to 1 influence districts. We expect to see at least 5 congressional districts that could consist of majority-minority coalitions. This includes at least 5 Black opportunity districts plus another influence district. So to summarize, when we look at all 3 chambers as it relates to minority representation, here's what our benchmarks tell us we should expect in fairly drawn maps. Please keep in mind with Black majority districts, we mean we expect at least this many with potential for more. So in Congress, we're looking at 14 total districts, 4 of those being, at least 4 being Black majority and a potential of 0 to 1 being potential opportunity districts. In the state Senate, we're looking at least 16 Black majority districts with 0 to 3 being potential opportunity districts. And in the Georgia House, at least 48 Black majority districts with 3 to 11 being potential opportunity districts. Looking at the partisan split and competitive districts, here's what our benchmarks tell us we should expect to see in fairly drawn maps for the 2021 redistricting cycle. For Congress, 5 to 6 Democratic districts, 8 to 9 GOP, with competitive districts 0 to 3. In the state Senate, we're looking at 24 to 28 Democratic districts and the range of 28 to 32 Republican districts, with expected competitive districts 1 to 7. And in the Georgia House, we're looking at 81 to 88 Democratic districts, 92 to 99 Republican districts, with potentially 9 to 22 competitive districts. We're excited to share these with you and look forward to now using these benchmarks in real time. Thank you.
And with that, we are going to transition over to Sarah, who is our, as she described herself earlier, our resident cartographer. And she's going to share, we gave a little heads up at our last town hall about this interactive map coming, and it's here now. Sarah?
Great, thank you so much. Let me just get my screen share started. Okay, can everyone see an interactive map? Great.
Yes.
All right, well, I am really excited to share this interactive map with you all that I have been working on for months now. So this is an interactive map that shows all of the current district boundaries for the state House, state Senate, and Congress. You can see the state House boundaries right now. And it includes the demographics from the 2020 census and the partisan lean at the voting precinct level as layers that you can toggle back and forth. So with this map, you can explore what Georgia looks like now, today. And then when the proposed maps come out, you can actually explore how the proposed legislative and congressional map will look against the population of Georgia today. So I'm just going to walk through a little bit of the functionality here. So right now we're looking at the state House boundaries with the % Black voting age population visible. You can zoom in and out of the map and it will zoom into a closer zoom of the Black voting age population. So we're looking at Macon right now. You can also use the search button to zoom to particular places around Georgia. So I'll just go to Statesboro, and you can do things like change to the % minority voting age population and the partisan lean, which shows an average of the % Democrat for 3 recent elections in 2018, 2020, and 21. So you can see clearly here how the Statesboro is currently represented by 3 different House districts that divide Statesboro, the city, right down the middle. You can further look at just the streets background if you want to actually see exactly where those districts are dividing Statesboro. Let's zoom out to the state again so that we can see what it looks like with the percent minority voting age population and state Senate, for instance. You can also use this button here to show the data instead of what is happening inside of the districts, but what is actually happening at the district level. So this is the percent minority voting age population for each Senate district. And you can then hover over each district to get more information about the demographics and partisan lean of that particular district. You can additionally add the city boundaries, and I'll just switch back to, let's try the Hispanic voting age population, and maybe we can zoom into the Gainesville area. So you can see the detail of the Hispanic voting age population in that area, and then you can also add the city boundaries to see how the districts and cities interact. You can look at a place like Lawrenceville and actually see how many districts represent them as well. And I'll just do one more zooming to a city. So Athens, Georgia. And looking at the partisan lean, you can see how the state Senate dissects Athens down the middle, as does their congressional district, and as does the House districts. So these are just a few of the ways that you can explore this map. And as I said, when the proposed maps are released and verified, then we will be able to add those into this drop down as well, so that you can take a look at exactly where those new proposed maps are and how that they will possibly represent your community. So I look forward to hearing about all of the things that you learn as you explore this map.
Thank you, Sarah. That is, it's a phenomenal tool, and I see we already have some questions in the Q&A that we're going to transition to here in a minute. So we'll look to you for some of those answers. So we are going to move into a Q&A portion now. You have heard a lot of information. And the other thing that we want to talk about, and literally we didn't know we were going to be talking about this until a couple of minutes ago, and that is that we have breaking news, literally, in that today, Lieutenant Jeff Duncan and the redistricting chair in the Senate, John Kennedy, released a draft map for Congress. All we have is this PDF that you see on the right-hand side of the screen here, and I went ahead and put the current map on the left-hand side of the screen, which I think, I don't remember what year that's from. I think they did some redistricting, mid-cycle redistricting on it along the way. But anyway, that's the current map compared to the proposed map. We have that, and we have just a short press release that was put out by Senator Kennedy and Lieutenant Governor Duncan. So first of all, we applaud the fact that we have a draft map more than a month ahead of the announced special session, which is probably most of you know, last week, Governor Kemp set the special session to start on November the 3rd, the day after the municipal elections on November the 2nd. So we have a month to analyze this map. As we talked about before, we're not sure of what the process is going to be to give comments back on this map. However, a month is going to give us a lot of time to do that. And we'll talk again in a second about just the normal route that we have right now for commenting. There is a lot of commenting going on Twitter as we speak. And a lot of focus, obviously, on the 6th and 7th districts, which is where most interest lies, and that's Lucy McBath and Carolyn Bordeaux's district. And there are some pretty significant changes to their districts here. We have given this PDF map to our folks at Princeton, and given their wonderful analytical capabilities, they're telling us they're going to be able to do some analytics already based on this PDF map. And we're hoping tomorrow that we will get actual shape files from the redistricting office to be able to do a full analysis of this. So the timeliness of our benchmarks is certainly proving true. We will be able to compare our benchmarks to this map, hopefully within a very short period of time. So that's really as much as we know right now. You can kind of take a look and see that obviously there have been adjustments in other areas. Remember that Carolyn Bordeaux's district had the most overage, I guess is the right word to say, of population. In other words, had grown the most of any congressional district in the country, something like 94,000 additional folks in that district over what the new district allotments are for Congress in Georgia. So some fairly significant changes here. Ken, do you want to add anything to that conversation about the new map?
I'll just add that, some of our myths talked about the lack of transparency and lack of public comment. We're thrilled that that this map anyway is out now. We don't know when we're going to see the State House and State Senate maps. One would hope we're going to get them soon. We don't know. What we don't know is whether we're going to have public comment hearings on the maps. That they just haven't announced anything. So as far as we know at the moment, we'll have these maps to look at and study, and then in special sessions starting in early November, we'll have a chance to hopefully testify. So again, we have to give credit where credit is due here to the folks who in the redistricting committees this year who are giving us maps much earlier. So I want to thank them. We're going to have to thank them publicly for doing that so far. And we'll see what the maps turn out to be. We're going to not comment much on these maps in terms of our view of them, in terms of the benchmarks, until we've done our homework. So we'll be a little bit silent for a while, but we are going to be looking at these very, very quickly and try to get a handle on these maps. I will just say one comment is that for those of you who are joining, who are also part of our mapping SWAT team, we're trying to get that SWAT team getting going. Time is now. I'm going to be reaching out. In fact, I have reached out to several people today to have conversations about getting those organized. So we have a map to look at. It's very exciting stuff.
Okay, with that, we are going to open it up for some Q&A. And as I said, we already had some questions in the chat, in particular around Sarah's interactive map. So Sarah, maybe you can answer a couple of these. From Bob Morgan, his question was whether the map was based on census tracts. Can you give us a little more information about that?
Yeah, I sure can. So when you look at the demographics on the map at the state level, it is showing census tract level data. When you zoom in closer, it actually gets more fine-grained and shows the census block level, which is a much smaller level of detail. When you're looking at the partisan lean data, that is at the voting precinct level. So those are the three levels. And I also just wanted to point out that one of the other things that you can see in the map is actually what the current population is in each district. So you can explore for yourself what the overages are for districts across the state.
Okay, and one more question before you go, Sarah. And I think you did end up answering this, but can you explain how the overlay of the proposed maps will work on the interactive map?
Yeah, absolutely. It will look exactly like the boundaries for the current maps do. So it will just be another selection in that drop-down list where you can just select, instead of the current house map, you can select the proposed house map and see what the population of that map would be in the demographics and the partisan lean. So that will, as soon as we get all of the maps from the state, then we'll be adding each one of them to this interactive map for you to explore as well.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm looking through the Q&A and we've got a number of other questions. So if you've got questions, please go ahead and add those to the Q&A or to the chat. We want to try and get to as many as we can before we go into our very last information. And from Julia Leon, she asked about our benchmarks in reference to incumbency protection. Ken, can you take that?
Yeah, I will say that we are going to be looking at incumbency. Incumbency is primarily an issue for state House and state Senate. You have to live in your district for 1 year before an election takes place. So those are the two maps where it applies. It's a bit of an issue. It becomes a bit of a political issue in the congressional map. Like if you no longer live in your district, that issue got raised, I think, with the John Ossoff race in 2017, whenever it was. But there's no rule that says, or no law says you have to live in that district. We're going to be looking at that, and we're going to be looking at whether whether incumbents have been unfairly paired up, etc. That'll be coming. We won't have that analysis immediately until we have the actual maps in hand. But we have gone out and made the effort. Karen McCowan's team has collected an address list of all the 236, I think it is, state house legislators. We know where they currently live. We're going to be looking to see how they were treated in these maps to see if there's any untoward influence being directed at various people. So we'll have some of that information later on when we get the maps, actual maps.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ken. Barbara, I'm looking through, I'm trying to piece out some other questions that we haven't covered. Do you have others that you want us to respond to?
We have a couple of questions about, now that we have this data from the PGP project and the benchmarks, what is our strategy to make it part of the public discussion of these maps? And related to that, how can people on this call help us apply public pressure to the legislators?
Ken, you want to start?
I'll definitely start. Yes, we will be releasing to the public our analysis of the maps. We are actually going to hold another legislators only briefing like we did last week. We invited all 236 legislators to a briefing to show the benchmarks. Unfortunately, we only had about a dozen, I think it was, or maybe it was somewhere between 12 and 20. I can't remember the exact number that actually came, but they did come, which is good. We're going to be doing that again when we have analysis of the maps to show them what we think of those maps. We'll be directing our advice directly to them. We will also be briefing the media. We got great media attention over the last week or so. We did our media briefing last Thursday, I think it was. For the media, we've had great coverage across the state about the benchmarks, and we expect to have good coverages again. So we'll be using the media, and then obviously we'll be talking a little bit later in the program about how we want individuals around the state to engage and get involved. So our strategy is basically to make a lot of noise. To summarize that way, it's a public pressure campaign, right? We would love for the legislature to invite us in to help them. I think they're reluctant to do that, but we're going to make sure that they are certainly aware of what we have done and what the benchmarks are telling us and what our assessment of the maps. So I would describe that as kind of our main strategy. I will also say that Princeton Gerrymandering Project is doing this on a national basis. They're going to be analyzing Georgia's maps along with every other state, and so they get a lot of media attention as well, given what they're doing. And given the fact that Georgia is really being watched very closely at the national level, I think we're going to get some attention. The national attention appears to be mostly about our congressional maps, because as you know, everybody's trying to game out what happens to Congress in 2022. How many states gained seats? Are they going to gerrymander people in or out? A lot of emphasis. We've had a couple actually reporters at national level talking to us about our views on that. So bottom line is we're going to be really talking. We'll have another town hall with you folks as well as soon as we have the maps analyzed. So our strategy is to keep up what we're doing and keep the pressure on.
Barbara, other questions from the chat? And if you have questions about any of the information we've shared tonight, or if you have other myths that you've heard that you want to know whether they're true or not, please put that in the chat and we'll.
We've got an interesting question here from Bob Morgan. You know, we've talked about race and we've talked about partisan lean. He asks, has income been relevant in map drawing? He says, Senate District 1 appears to be designed to include the maximum number of gated communities.
Ken, you want to take that?
No.
Can actually speak to that.
We have never, Karen McCowan or Sarah,
Yeah.
maybe we have never heard that question. So Bob wins the award for the question of the evening. You've stumped us. I don't know if that's been looked at all. Karen, do you know?
I don't believe it's part of the data that Princeton is examining. That would have to be, their inputs include the census data and analysis of voting behavior for, you know, an average for these benchmarks for an average of the 2018 governor, 2020 president, and 2021 Warnock Senate race. So I don't believe that income figures into, it doesn't figure into their benchmarks. I'm not sure that that data is available. Sarah, do you know? Is that in the census data?
There is income data in the census, but right now from the 2020 census, at least, all they've released is the redistricting data, which is solely demographics. There certainly is American Community Survey and other census data information that's available that is not as current, but we haven't used it in our analyses, and I don't know of anyone that has actually. It's really interesting.
I think we might have time for one more question. Barbara, is there another one?
I think we've answered most of the questions in the chat. So if we're not considering income, I wonder whether Sarah thinks that perhaps legislators are considering it.
Oh, I couldn't speak to what they are considering since they do everything behind closed doors.
Exactly. So we have no way of knowing whether they consider it or not.
Okay, well, let's move on then. And we've got just a couple more items for you before we end for the evening. So we want to tell you about a federal action that may have impact on redistricting. And Ken's done a lot of analysis on this. Ken, you want to review?
Yes, thank you. Actually, this was the breaking news from last week until we got the map today. So this is now almost old news. If you're following what's going on at the federal level, you know that there's been a lot of discussion around federal, the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. So the Senate has now, and actually under the leadership of our Senator, Reverend Raphael Warnock, he's been very involved in this, has now filed a revised act around, they call the Freedom to Vote Act. It's a skinny down version of what was called the For the People Act. Significantly, this is important, that there's one area of this act called Title V, which directly impacts congressional redistricting. And this act actually would affect Georgia this year. It's very, very interesting. So we would love to see this act passed. Why is this good? Well, number one, it bans partisan gerrymandering for congressional districts. It would ban mid-decade redistricting for congressional districts. It actually adds new protections for minority districts that are beyond those that are already in the Voting Rights Act. So it actually adds protections for coalition districts, influence districts that we talked about, some of the pictures that you saw when Cuffy presented the benchmarks, some of those things would be protected. It codifies the need to think about communities of interest into law, and it would allow lawsuits to proceed in federal court against these provisions, which means that it overturns the Supreme Court's ban in Rucho against partisan gerrymandering suits in the federal courts. Because now that there's a law, you could sue against the law. In fact, you as a citizen under this law could raise a could raise a lawsuit along with the Attorney General of the United States. And this would apply to Georgia's 21 congressional plan, because the way the act reads is it says a state cannot use a plan that violates one of these provisions in an election, which means that once the act is, even if Georgia passes its districts now, let's suppose the act doesn't get done until January, February, whatever it is. Well, then someone could bring a lawsuit under this act claiming that the map, which had been enacted months ago, violates one of these provisions. So this would apply now to the work we're doing now. It does not touch the State House and the State Senate, but it does apply to congressional redistricting. And so we're very, very excited by this new act. There's other things in the act around voting. This is just the one section that we are very, very concerned about. What can you do about this? Look, getting this act passed is basically going to boil down to, can the Senate find a way around the filibuster? Because it's going to get filibustered, let's be clear. So I know that Senator Warnock is very committed to try and seeing this through. We know that Senator Manchin from West Virginia, who's the guy I've been trying to broker the compromise, is trying to get it to happen. If I was a betting person, I would say we're going to get a filibuster on it. They've got to find a way around that. So I think what we can do is call, write, tweet our senator, our representatives in Congress to say, let's get this done, because it affects Georgia this year. We, Fair Districts, have written a letter to our entire congressional delegation saying, this helps us now. We want this now. So we're excited by it. It was only introduced in the Senate on the 15th of September, so it's very new. The action is going to take place probably in the next few weeks. So again, help us. Get on the phone. Write letters, emails, whatever you can to try to get this act going.
Great, thanks, Ken. So now what can you do? This is probably the most important slide of the night. And that is that we are developing what we're calling our action team. The reality is we're here now, and we've got, essentially between now and November 3rd and the time of special session, which will be short, probably about 2.5 to 3 weeks based on past actions. And so we really need an action team that can help us focus on getting our word to those legislators on the redistricting committees. So we're looking for folks to sign up. And the way that you sign up is to go to either to our website, or you can type in this bit.ly, FDGA Action Team, and it will take you to our volunteer section of our website. And go ahead and sign up for Contact Legislators. We've got a team of folks that are going to be putting together messages that will be relevant along the way over the coming weeks that we want to get out to these legislators through calling, through emailing, through posting on social media, etc. And when we get to the time of special session, we're working with some of our partner organizations to also think about what are the actions that we can take to make some noise during special session. We may have a rally at the State House or other kinds of actions, or if there's something that comes up along the way unexpected, we want to have a group of folks that we can get quickly with and say, hey, we need to be down at the State House tomorrow at 10 o'clock and show some, citizen interest in these issues. So please join our action team. Julie Edelson and Ann Abramowitz and Pam Woodley are folks that are going to really be leading this effort. Pam, as you know, has been leading our postcarding effort. We have now delivered 40,000 postcards to these redistricting committee members, and Pam's developed a great statewide network of volunteers for that effort. And now we're going to pivot to this more nimble kind of action that we need to be ready to take over the coming weeks. We also want to remind everybody that there is still time to submit your written comments to the redistricting committees at this bit.ly public comment GA. you'll find a form that's on the legislative website that you can fill in and say what you would like to see. And you can also review what folks have been saying from all over the state. And it's been very interesting. We've had a lot of folks that have been speaking out about wanting fair maps, wanting transparency, wanting the chance for public review, and heartening to us, we've also seen a lot of people speaking out and saying that they want the legislature to pay attention to the benchmarks that the Princeton Gerrymandering Project has developed for us. So please join our action team and be part of making a difference here in the coming weeks up to and including special session. And then finally, just a couple other things to put on your calendar. We're calling it It's Showtime for our next town hall, which is scheduled for October the 25th. So it'll be right before special session time. And we anticipate a lot of information to be shared at that time. If we have draft maps, we'll be sharing what we know about those, how they compare to our benchmarks, and other plans that we have for special sessions. So please mark that on your calendars. And then again, we are continuing to plug our partners at Fair Count are doing Mapping Mondays, and this is a chance for you to participate in mapping your community of interest, using the representable tool, which is again a tool that Princeton Gerrymandering Project has developed to help communities map their communities. And Fair Count does a nice job of walking through and helping folks do that. They're doing that every Monday, and you can sign up on Mobilize to participate in that. So with that, we are going to say goodnight to all of you. I believe in the chat, there's a link to a survey, and we'll also be sending that out to you. You know, we like to have your feedback for future programs. And I want to have especially thank all the folks that participated in the program tonight. You saw a lot of folks that have been very active in Fair Districts tonight. And of course, there's a whole tech team behind that as well. So thanks to the whole Fair Districts team for putting this together, and thanks to you for participating and hopefully getting involved on our action team and other things over the coming weeks. Thank you.